I will.
Awesome.
Thinking we wait until about 2:05 and then get started. Does that work for everybody?
Yes, we can wait for a few more minutes and then kick it off.
All right, so let's get started. Thank you so much for coming today to our webinar, Leaders Eat Last. I'm going to introduce our speakers and then let them tell you a little bit more about why we chose this as a topic. So we have Robert Kipp. He's nearly 20-year veteran of the construction industry, working at companies like Clark Construction, Skanska, Tudor Perani, AECOM Tishman, and more. He's been at Holt Construction for the last over 4 years, being the head field director. With nearly two decades in the field, he's bringing expert industry knowledge around that field work and how the industry can change to make workers' lives better. We also have Niran, our co-founder of Kwant. Prior to founding Kwant, Niran worked both on commercial and public infrastructure projects domestically and internationally, focusing on implementing construction tech and how it benefits both the workers and the owners, led us to where we are today. So as always, if you have any questions, please put them in that Q&A box. We'll try to save some time at the end to answer them. And Kip, why don't you start? We came up with this topic together, but maybe you could expand more on leaders eating last and how we can support our workers.
Sure. So leaders eat last is a mantra that comes from the military. And it is the responsibility of every leader to make sure that the men and women under your command are given the necessary tools in order for them to continue to function. So leaders eat last is something that people can apply to the construction industry very easily. And too often in our business, when you think of construction, you think of cranes, you think of equipment, you think of steel, concrete. But at the end of the day, all of that stuff, millions of dollars worth of material and equipment, it's just a pile of junk, trash, without the men and women who are building the projects that we take for granted every single day. We're sitting in rooms right now doing this webinar on infrastructure that was built with the blood, sweat, and tears of men and women toiling for a combined task to make the built environment better for society. And that's kind of where it sums up.
Thanks, Kip. Thanks for the introduction, Amy. I'm super excited to be hosting this together with Kip. I met Kip several years ago at one of the projects he was working on at LaGuardia Terminal C. And, we were looking at increasing the safety and productivity, I think primarily around safety around the site. And he provided us some really amazing feedback into our product, our roadmap, our implementation. And ever since then, like we've been, friends, and then he's given us a lot of feedback along the way that, I can, that actually we've implemented in our product. And so, and I know that both of us went to Columbia. I think my old friend Eli also was a classmate of Kip at the time. Welcome to the webinar, Kip. I think we have a lot to talk about here. So let me start by giving a brief next step of what is the agenda of this webinar. So Amy just did the intros. Thank you so much. We're going to go through some of his stories of being a veteran and working around the world, and how those lessons learned and how those principles has been applied to construction sites, and primarily around the safety, primarily around teamwork. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about construction workforce evolution. Some really interesting stories about Kip's family history of being in the industry, and how today's workforce as we see where we are. And where does a technology stand in there? Where are the new frontiers of like bringing new innovation and attracting new talents to the industry, so that we can make construction industry cool again? I think both of us, we share some stories about how construction tech wasn't cool, but now it has suddenly become the coolest thing in the town. And we end with some of the mega projects that that is in New York City and around the world, makes our homes and makes our cities and makes that's where we live. And let's start with this, right? So Kip, you've been in the construction industry for a while. A lot of people didn't know about this story probably, or maybe they knew about your work as a veteran in the Army. And these are some really cool pictures that I now see, that thanks for sharing with us. And you look very handsome in some of these pictures here, man. So tell me a little bit about your story here.
All right, so I think well, in order to really frame this, so previous to my military involvement, I was figuring out, like anybody else, what they wanted to do when they grew up. And I was leaning towards law enforcement, and I was on a path to both either state or federal law enforcement at that time, going through high school. And at that time, to be New Jersey State Trooper, you need to be 6 feet tall, you need to be 200 pounds, you need to have a 4-year college degree, you need to have military experience. So I went to a senior military college up in Vermont, was studying criminal justice up there. Then September 11th happened and changed not only my trajectory of my life, but the trajectory of, I think, a lot of people in my generation. And a call to service kind of welled across the nation. And I applied to go on active duty, went on active duty, did my 2 tours in Iraq and a couple other places, and all different operations within the states and abroad. And that's where I really learned kind of these leadership lessons that are such people-guided leadership lessons, that everything's about a team. And then folks who think about the military, they think about the rank structure, that, it really depends on the rank. But there's a saying in the military that if you have to pull on your collar, and they say that because that's where rank is worn. If you have to pull on your collar to tell somebody to do something, that means that you didn't earn the rank on your collar. So it's all about personal accountability and trust with the troops that you're working with, to make sure that they know you have your best interests and their best interests at heart all the time. And moving forward, that leaders eat last is a military term, where the most senior person in the Army eats last. So if there's a general officer and everybody's eating, the lowest ranking private eats first, and the general officer eats last, and all the way through. That's kind of where that all comes from.
Thanks for sharing that, Kip. Yeah, and then let's bring that to construction, right? So I know that your family, your grandfather was in the construction world, and he was a draftsman. just as a background, I'm an architect by undergraduate, so I used to draw a lot of CADs as well. But your grandfather must have drawn amazing drawings on the board using pen and paper, different kinds of pencils and pen actually. And I want to learn more about your role in Sopranos actually.
Well, I'll start with my grandfather. My grandfather was an iron worker and then was a draftsman. And I still have some of his scales that I use on my desk on a daily basis. But one of my earliest memories of him is he was taking me into a project that he was working on in downtown Manhattan. And it was a Saturday, and we're driving in his '60 Impala, and he's smoking a cigarette, and I'm bouncing around with no car seat, no seat belts, and we roll up to the hoist, and he parks right at the hoist platform. We get on the hoist, and hearing this little 8-year-old kid looking around like the world is so cool. We get on this hoist platform. The operator's sitting there drinking a beer. We roll all the way up to the working platform, and working platform is the metal deck. He goes walking out because he was a former iron worker and he's dressed me. He used that every day. I'm an 8-year-old kid. I go to follow my grandfather, and anybody who's walked on metal deck that's not fully detailed and fastened down knows that it bounces around. So here I'm 8 years old, and the ground starts bouncing around. So I freak out and grab his leg, and he backhands me and knocks me on my butt, picks me up and says, "What are you doing? Stop." He's like, "Don't whine, don't complain. There's two kinds of people in this business. The one who whine, bitch, come up with excuses, and the kind who just shut up and do your job. Always find a way to get your job done. Figure out how to work forward." And I just kept my mouth shut, walked around with him the rest of the time. And it was a great learning experience, and my kind of real first exposure to the construction industry at that time. It's obviously changed a lot. I don't think you're allowed to take an 8-year-old kid up on a working platform with a hoist with everybody drinking beer and smoking cigarettes anymore. But some of those lessons are still hard learned in the industry today, that we have to work together. We have to collaboratively move things forward. We can't come up with excuses. It's raining, it doesn't matter. It's still got to get done. It's hot, it doesn't matter. It still needs to get done. You got to move forward. As far as my little blip in the background of a Sopranos episode, that's kind of just a noteworthy, growing up in North Jersey, you're exposed to that kind of stuff. I was working at a place called Ramsey Outdoor at that time, and they were filming a Sopranos episode, I think season 2, where I was just like a blip in the background as they were doing the film in there. So I saw Gandolfini and the whole cast. It was a really cool experience. But that was
Awesome.
too.
So, that's just the nature of how the industry was. And as you mentioned, it has changed now. There are stronger regulations, there are stronger compliance that has made this job site more safer and has guardrails in place right now, that are very important, I think. And I strongly, follow the same principles as well, that leaders is last, and you just gotta get your things done. My earliest work actually started as an architect, but I started working in the United Nations, and I worked in several countries actually. And I was very young at the time, and I was traveling around the world, and we were building new offices, we were building camps, and my boss was actually from Georgia. He was a Georgian Army veteran. United Nations is just full of military veterans actually. And I remember flying with on a helicopter, opening up a new office, and it had all the furnitures. And when they offloaded it, I just sat down, sitting like this, because I graduated from a fancy school and I don't want to pick up any stuff, and my boss, with a lot of good credentials, he was picking up all the stuff and moving this around, and he told me, you can't sit down like this. You just gotta, you gotta help people or somehow contribute to the process, not just watch there, and that really became my guiding principles even till now, where anything that is going on, I want to either support, contribute, or somehow I want to be part of that, because just saying that that's not my job, it's not going to move the things around, and I think as a leader, it's important for us to understand where to contribute and take things forward. So
Yeah, I think 100%. Too often leaders think that I'm in charge, so I don't have to do anything, and it's quite the reverse. And I think a lot of military leaders know this from their military experience and transition this into the construction industry, where They take care of the workers, because at the end of the day, it's the men and women who are building these projects that are changing the environment. That project executive, director, vice president, they have fancy titles, and they might wear a fancy white shirt or a tie and, you know, a suit. But at the end of the day, they're irrelevant if not for the men and women who are out there in the rain and the heat and the cold, putting these projects together, changing the built environment, making the built environment for society to continue to flourish.
Yeah, that's awesome. I understand that, you've worked for many companies, along the way from ACOM to now to Holt, right? Do you have certain stories? I remember you told a story about your work with Tishman, actually. Uh, but do you have any memorable stories of the construction world from like several, like last decade to now?
Well, I think this picture right here is an interesting one. So this is the height of COVID, and this is one of these emergency COVID hospitals. So this is when the rest of the world was sheltering in place. This is like March, April of 2020. And you had 300 rough men and women working together round the clock away from their families, building these emergency COVID hospitals, where this was still early on in the pandemic. Nobody knew really what's going on. It was difficult to get material, difficult to get, and you had these men and women who were construction workers, professionals, there on site when the rest of the world is locked up in their houses with their, windows drawn, calling for Uber Eats, here working on top of each other to try to safeguard the rest of society. And I think this is just a microcosm example of the construction industry and how it continues to safeguard society, safeguard the built environment, safeguard the rest of the population without people noticing. I often say that it's an interesting psychological experiment that if you ever want to be invisible in New York City, you just wear a hard hat vest and stand in the middle of the street. No one will ever see you, and you become completely invisible. And those people who are completely invisible are the ones who are making society happen every single day. And this is just another example of that microcosm, round the clock, away from your families. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but you're dedicated to your craft, dedicated to your job, and dedicated to your team to get this to happen.
That's an amazing story. Thanks for sharing that, and thank you for your service, Kip. I know that with COVID and construction companies and construction workers especially are on the forefront of building things, and when they like even anything that's building or anything that's demolished, you guys are getting mobilized, or we're getting mobilized the first, actually. So I think that that's such an amazing contribution to the society. I also want to talk a little more about the hard hat, this famous hard hat. So I've seen this hard hat in many pictures by now, actually. And I know that construction, everybody loves their hard hat. So, we have both wearables that goes on a hard hat or a vest, and there's a story on why the vest one is more popular right now. And you had that one of the philosophies, Kip, where you said that for the union adoption and for the union to love this, it has to be a smart badge. And I think this was one of the, because our first version was a hard hat tag. You were one of the contributors to make it into a badge, but let's talk about your hard hat a little bit here.
So I got my hard hat right here. It's been with me a very long time, and you can't see it, but
yeah.
It continues to gain scars and stickers from all the different projects, and it tells a tale, but it's something that brings me a lot of pride. And I think a lot of people in the industry have similar affinities for the hard hats. And what I was discussing, I believe at that time, you wanted to have this kind of like, in lack of better terms, a tumor on my hard hat. My hard hat's at work hard. I had somebody in San Francisco offer me some serious money to buy this hard hat. I'm not going to put this device on it that doesn't fit. But the badges, at least in our New York environment, we are very used to carrying multiple badges, multiple scans. And the thing I was explaining to you when we were meeting that time is that for a worker to take this device around with them, there has to be some type of direct correlation to an ROI of the individual worker. Why would a worker who already has a full-time job, already has a boss, already has a family to go to, take more responsibility or just be tracked? It's going to provide no value. But a thing that is a distinguishing factor is that your device has a help function, like your grandma's push me, I fall in same sense. There's on the badge, there's a ability to push a button and send a text message and get immediate help if something happens, if you need assistance, if there's an emergency, and having a little bit of that safeguard, knowing that you're always connected to something that can get you some assistance when you might need your hands to hold onto a ladder, might need your hands to stop somebody's bleeding, might need your hands to perform CPR. You can do that very quickly and continue to render aid or safeguard the situation instead of trying to fumble around with your phone and call somebody.
Yeah, I'm glad you have that memory. I still remember our first version of the badges didn't have the SOS button. And I went back to my team after a conversation I had with you, and I told my hardware team and my software team about, guys, we gotta get this SOS button built, and our team, I think, built it within like 2 to 4 weeks. We were able to produce that, and we came back and presented to the entire LaGuardia team, actually. And I think that was, so, your contribution to the industry, and especially to Quant, has been very amazing. Thank you for that again, Kip. So let's talk a little bit more about just like, what has your contribution been towards, like you played a role in a lot of other construction tech companies as well, right? Let's talk a little bit about some of the things you've done. How have you participated? How you've seen that evolve right now as well?
So to understand my kind of involvement in con tech, you have to look back to my time in the military. It seems like a lot falls back to that. So I was in the 4th Infantry Division, which was considered the digital brigade at that time. So in 2003, 2004, we were using FBCB2, we were using digital communication, digital radios, we had GPS, we had this. In the middle of a war zone, we were sending digital messages back and forth between pieces of equipment and operations, having live stream a video feed from drones and all kinds of stuff that was completely foreign to the rest of the society at that time. Then when I transitioned out of the military and I started working for Clark Construction down in DC, and I saw that half the folks were still not using cell phones. We were running copper lines up the building to go ahead and communicate back and forth with the office. There was only one desktop computer that 4 folks shared, and you only sat on a milk crate with 2 inches insulation on it to type your daily reports in the computer, and that was it. Everything else, you go out and live. And I said, guys, there's better ways to do this stuff. Why aren't we using radios? Well, the radios are too big, they cost too much. I said, what about these small little walkie-talkies? They got a 5-mile range. They're like, what are you talking about? I said, these are $100. We can get a package of them. Start doing that. They at that time, there was a new groundbreaking piece of hardware that they came out with. It was called the Latista tablet. So it was the predecessor to the iPad, but it was nothing more than a civilian version of the FBCB2. So they brought this, tech tool, and I was able to like operate it day one. They're like, how do you know? I said, this is literally just an FBCB2, just a lighter version that's not bulletproof. And was able to start manipulating that digital technology to provide value to the team. At that time, punch lists were done with a dictaphone. You know what a dictaphone is? So it's like a recording device. So you record it. So somebody would go through on a cart and record the punch list, and then they would hand those recordings over to an admin or somebody in the main office, and they would type up all that information. So we were able to manipulate that Latista tablet with a headset so that way you could talk directly into the Latista tablet, and it would type that data entry into a software. At that time, it was groundbreaking, but in retrospect, it was very slow and clunky. Moving forward to when I was working with the United Nations, that was the first project that Apple had fielded the iPads on, which is a great piece of hardware, awesome piece of hardware, but the software hadn't caught up to the way that hardware could be utilized in the field. So it was still clunky. So at the United Nations, we had 5,000 sheets. It was using a normal dwelling PDF viewer on the iPad was just mind-bogglingly frustrating. It never got used. The guys and girls who had it ended up just leaving them on the desk because it was easier to just have an 11x17 printed or reference the drawings. Fast forward to when I was at Hudson Yards and the iPads had developed further, and PlanGrid had been fielded. to a digital drawing management system, which was groundbreaking at that time because it worked in an offline environment. It was tailor-made for the iOS, for that iPad, and it was just mind-bogglingly strong. It made me a force multiplier in my craft. It gave me all that information at my fingertips, and it would show on every day that I would be in meetings with people 20 and 30 years older than me, 30, 40 people, and I was the one who had the answers because I had it at my fingertips and I was able to reference it. In construction, you don't necessarily need to know everything. It's great to know everything, but it's impossible. But what you do need to know is where to reference the material, where to get the information needed at the time you need it. And with the iPad and PlanGrid, it really was a game changer. And that's why they did that Fortune article about me walking around a job site with an iPad, which my wife to this day finds hilarious, that they did a Fortune article about me because I was walking around a job site with an iPad.
Yeah. I actually didn't realize that you were using Latista at that time, because I met the OC of Latista. He was not a CDO, he was a co-founder. Just a couple of weeks ago, I met him. And so, yeah, I think they were the early product that came to the market with that field application. And now, we've seen so many things that has come out. And I remember that, you were working with the PlanGrid team, and as you mentioned, they were really game changer. They built an amazing product, right? What made that technology so great, Gabe? Because I think that there's so many companies out there, but it seems like PlanGrid was definitely the one that kind of stood up above everybody. What made it so great?
Well, I think it was timing, and I think it was hardware, right? The iPad was tailor-made for a field application. It's rugged, it's got a long battery life, it's not susceptible to dust, water, that stuff, especially with the OtterBox cases and the more modern versions of the iPad. It's really a durable tool, basically giving you an endless supply of a notebook at your hands to be able to reference, sort, and find information. And the PlanGrid software platform took that first application of, like, at Hudson Yards, our conform set was like 20,000 sheets, and we would get updates anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week with slip sheets. To do that manually would literally take an entire room in multiple plan clerks to just stay up to date, as opposed to being done completely digitally, being able to flow all that information. As CMs and GCs, our job is to give the right information to the right people in order to do their job at the time that they need it. And a digital platform tool like that with the iPad, with PlanGrid, really was a game changer. And then you had men and women paying out of pocket for iPads, paying out of pocket for subscriptions, because there was such a high ROI for the individual that it was a no-brainer.
Yeah, that's exactly, like, timing is so important. Like in startups, they always say, why now? Why is this product applicable right now? Like, and timing is so critical that, you could have a product that's amazing, but if it's not timed, like, you could be too early for the market. And I know some of the people I know will consider PlanGrid as a glorified PDF reader, but we all know that a glorified PDF has so much power in the field already, and with all the things that's connected together, it, like you said, it force multiplied that a lot of people are still trying to live up to that right now. I think a lot of companies are trying to still build up to that level, actually. So that's a great story. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about, like, going back to the workforce, right? So some of the stats this is from the DOB report. I recently saw this, where we look at construction workforce. We look at both sides, right? Where you can see that there is a significant amount of construction workforce who are making 200K plus. And but there's a lot of portion also making, like 50 to 75 grand, actually, like, and in many cases, like, you can see that these guys will be the primary breadwinners of the house, right? I just had a meeting with one of the insurance company yesterday, and he was so fascinated with what we do, because, we're not just doing this for the sake of building a technology, but we are doing this because we've we love the industry, we love the craft workers, and we appreciate the work they bring. And for us, making these people safer and making them realize that we actually support them and we appreciate their hard work is so important, like, And you can see here on the other side that these workers don't have insurance. Now, there might be multiple reasons for that, not, but you can see, keep that, like, as one of your stories, like, the construction workforce, like a skilled painter or skilled iron worker, man, they would make, as much as a tech worker, actually, like, So what are
Well,
those variables you see here from this data?
Well, it skews, right? So in the world that I live in, which is a 100% predominantly union environment, all the workers are covered with the collective bargaining agreements that provide, those benefits. That's not open to a lot of folks in non-union markets in other regions. So my exposure to the insurance is a little different. There's more safeguards for the workers that I work with on a daily basis, and their criteria of their compensation, like I believe right now, the hourly rate, I think burden for an iron worker in New York City is $107 an hour. Correct me if I'm wrong, but around that. That is a lot higher, and that's on straight time than somebody working in an office in San Francisco or somebody with a fancy suit down in Atlanta. Just because these men and women are wearing hard hats and vests and might be outside does not mean they're not pulling down a six-figure salary and have a pension on top of that and have, houses and cars and huge benefits to being able to have that craft. And once you have a craft and the ability to make things out of nothing with your hands, nobody can ever take that away from you. You talk now about the augmentation of artificial intelligence and how that will affect the white collar worker. That's what artificial intelligence will affect. It will eliminate a lot of these, like, playwriters, screenwriters. It'll eliminate these crafts. But what it will not eliminate is that the men and women who are building the built environment that is necessary for the rest of us even to be able to function, for us to even have a shower in our apartment. Do you know how much work had to go into it? You have to have, water lines run, you have the water treatment plant, you have the sanitary treatment plant, you have to have sewage lines, you have to have a structure, you have to have tile, you have to have waterproofing. There's so much that goes into everything that's around us every day that we all take for granted. And that is something that will never go away.
Yeah, that's so true. We talk about, like, even the educations that, we have. I think they have some basic education, like, like high school diploma. But 19% of them have bachelor's degree. Like, so there is a workforce that is coming with education into our industry. And that's a lot of new workforce that's coming in. And there's a huge demand for this. The unemployment has changed over time. So to the lowest level, where now, like, construction is, the labor shortage is kind of like kicking off right now. And then the aging workforce right now, and how do we now attract younger talents, and where does a tech come into play there, right? So in your sites right now, in your projects, where do you see these dynamics happening with the skilled workforce that's, has so many years of experience versus now the younger generation of workforce? Where do you see the dynamic playing?
So you see a generational gap, and I think there's lots of reasons, and I believe that there's probably some white papers floating on around of it. But a lot of people left the industry at the downturn in 2009. You had basically the center point of the industry was forced out. They went to do other things. So you had the top folks who stuck around, and you had the bottom folks who were not paid that much anyway to weather through it. So you have this gap in the industry. On top of that, then you have a graying of the industry as a whole, because for so long, society is pushed in order for you to be successful. You have to wear a tie, sit behind a desk, sit behind a cubicle, wear a fancy suit. They don't tell you that, okay, the average attorney in the United States makes less than the average plumber in New York City. You wouldn't know that because society doesn't teach us that. Society and our education system doesn't advocate for craft, doesn't advocate for creating. It advocates for continued education and consumption. it doesn't teach people to be self-reliant and rely on the skills and craft that they have in order to provide for them and their family and change the world around them.
Yeah. Um, um, let's switch to some tech that's affecting, right? Um, how has the field technology changed, Kip? Because I think that, these are all the safety tech that was one of the investors VC actually put it up a couple of weeks ago, and we're part of the like worksite management and training piece. Um, where do you see some cool stuff happening? And I know you're testing a few stuff of them. Like, where do you see that evolving?
So it's going to continue to evolve, especially when you have the labor shortages. We have to look for ways to automate the nonsense in the industry, get to the single source of truth. Concurrently with the adoption of all of these different technologies, you have what I call siloed data systems, where you end up getting data fatigue within the industry because everybody wants to try the latest and greatest thing. You got to pare that down and choose the right technology that really gives your team, your workers, and your company an ROI. And you have to collectively take it. If you were to employ all these softwares that wouldn't make your company any more technologically advanced, that wouldn't make your construction company any better, because these are all tools, just like the tools in that toolbox that your carpenter's carrying around. If you don't know how to use them and they're not being used, you're just carrying around a bunch of weights. It's same thing with technology and all these data silos. Until the data is actionable, until it's articulate, until it can really make a difference on a project, it's just a lot of noise.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, because ultimately, how do you put the data to use, right? Because everybody's saying we have all the data, we're collecting all the data, like, and how do we actually make it to use? I remember one of the other stories you brought to us, and I think you had this similar experience with PlantGrid as well, was to make it job site accessible, which means that the system and the platform and the app has to be working offline. Because if it didn't work offline, that means that, like, it's not usable in the field actually, right? So it's both ways, right? It has to be field applicable and ultimately give you the insights that you can now use to make decisions actually.
Yeah. So a lot of the technology is directed to back end office where they have reliable power, reliable internet. The average construction site does not have internet, does not have regular power, doesn't even have flushing bathrooms. So you're talking completely different language to the men and women who have to experience making the built environment for the folks. And working in an offline environment is a necessity because it can be underground. We were talking the Second Avenue subway, we're talking these big projects. Unless they're going to run cable down and repeaters, you're not going to have any internet service. So unless you're planning for that as part of your process of temporary services, it's not going to be there.
Yeah. I think we can talk a little bit more about Porter Jones actually, like, but because we have some interesting stories around that. And I think Amy is a part of their stories as well, but we can get to that in a bit. This is the stories of, how we worked together early on in our career. But this was a mega project where, it was a shell before, and now every time I go to the airport, I just feel like, wow, what an airport, it's so fast, it's so beautiful. And like, I was a very small piece, like, the tiniest piece probably, like, but Kip, you were a big piece of that. You saw that from the grounds up and being built to the end, like, what do you think about it? What's your experience with that?
I think it's funny you have these two pictures together because I'm more proud of the picture of the sunrise of that steel because that's something that only the men and women who are building that project, who are living it and breathing it every day, are able to experience. And that's just utter beauty and
Yes.
utter changing the built environment. That you're changing the horizon. Nobody will ever see the sky through there again because there will be a building.
Yeah.
And that building will be part of an airport, and that airport will be full of people, planes, and baggage. You are completely changed the dynamic of that small microcosm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like getting a backstage pass to greatest, like, musical band in the world, like, where you can actually see how they're building the buildings and how they're rehearsing, like, so it's the similar experience actually. This is my experience where I was going to this site once in a month or twice in a month to see progress, and I used to be on the project controls team. I started building some apps for them when I was working for Parson Brinkenoff, and I used to love going there. There was a whole world down there, and apparently the whole subway underneath the Second Avenue was built, the whole shell was built about 50 years ago, but because of lack of funding, they didn't move forward with that. And then later on, the government got some more funding, and there was a whole world there. There was no internet at the time, and I walked around so much in there. And I have a deep love for the transportation world, infrastructure world, and just how it connects our society together. I think I want to compare this with this other great piece of art that was built in um in Italy with so many great artists there, and it has the same perspective where it affects so much of our lives. And we take subways every day. I have a deep love for subways actually. Despite whatever people say, I'm actually like a big fan of subways. It's such a interesting place to be and to commute, and connects all our lives together, right? So Kip, tell me about the infrastructure that we're building and the contribution to society as a craft workers.
Oh, it's just mind-boggling, especially now as you have, denser populations, you have more urbanification, you have more of a need for these massive infrastructure projects. You have the Second Avenue subway. They're talking about the next phase of that right now in New York City. They're talking the PX tunnel, which will be a huge project connecting New Jersey and Manhattan through Hudson Yards. You have the 5 borough prison projects. You have the continuation of the JFK programs, continuation of LaGuardia programs, the completion here of the Newark Air Train. The amount of mega jobs going on, and that's just one region, one area, is mind-boggling, and it's going to continue to impact millions and millions of people. And only through these massive infrastructure projects and massive changes to the built environment are these mega cities possible. And when we're making these improvements as a society, we're not just making it for today, we're making it for tomorrow. We're making it for the millions of families that are going to be impacted by the benefit to these infrastructure projects from now until the end of time. I think it's amazing anytime I go through Grand Central, when I think about the history of Grand Central, and you think about how many people have been impacted simply by the construction of one building, one point of entry, and how that then rolls into other things. That rolls into One Vanderbilt right next door. Like that would not have been possible if not for that, and it continues to grow on and of itself. If you look at some of the initiatives that they're talking in Manhattan with the transition of existing office towers to solve the housing problems, that's a no-brainer. You have these infrastructure behemoths, these large towers that are underutilized. So let's reclassify them, reutilize them to help safeguard society, to decrease the cost of the average person, to decrease the demand on housing, so that way everybody can live, breathe, eat, play, and enjoy society without being burdened all the time. And these infrastructure projects are going to continue to do that.
Yeah, and I think some of these structures that we built or has been built now will be as impactful, or to some extent, like all these designs that were built hundreds of years ago, and now they are impacting our lives. And like you mentioned about the Roman army and the British army, same like that. This will stay till forever, to connect the people, to bring the tourist attractions, and to fascinate people every day, right? So
The men and women who built this chapel, who did the tile work, who did their names will never appear in a publication in history, but they're part of the legacy. And every man, woman who's part of building these infrastructure projects, you're part of that legacy. Especially in New York City, you're part of this historic transition, this movement forward of the city that very few people can ever say that they are part of. But from now until the day that I pass away, and even when my grandkids go through LaGuardia, go through JFK, they go, Grandpa worked on these projects.
Yeah.
And there'll be a little part of you that you share with the rest of society.
That's a joy we live in. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about like, where that translates into quant, where, being able to prevent incidents, people being able to make the workforce safer and make sure that they go back to their families at the end of the day, caring for them is a big part of our mission here. And, culture becomes such a strong thing, right? Where, we talk about Porter Jones, Cape, where, there's hundreds of thousands of workers in job sites, how do we make their lives better? Like, I know that Porter Jones are probably the best they can get right now, but
We missed the mark. As a society, we missed the mark. And the reason I'm laughing and you're bringing it up is this is one of my pet peeves on a job. One of my absolute, you want to get fired by me very quickly. Let me come on your job and your porta johns are not serviced, not clean, full of graffiti. And my standard of care is if my wife or my children had to use that porta john, would I be okay with them using it? If the answer is no, then that's not acceptable. And that's not acceptable for us to treat the men and women who work on our jobs, who are actually making it happen, to expect them to live like that. If you had an office tower full of all these people doing whatever they're doing in an office tower, and the bathrooms didn't function, and they had to walk down 20 flights of stairs to go use a porta john, how many of those people do you think would show up the next day? But in the construction industry, not only is it expected, it's the norm. It should not be the norm. We have to safeguard the workers and treat them as professionals. If you treat people like professionals, then they'll behave like professionals. If you treat people like you value them, and you value the contributions that they're giving to the project, it might cost a little more money, but guess what? It's the right thing for everyone involved. And if your family was using that porta john on that site, would you be okay with it? And if the answer is like, well, I have my own porta john, that's not the right answer. That's never a thing on my job. That's never a thing. Everybody uses facilities and everybody takes care of everybody.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to improve. And I'm glad that we were able to talk about that, because a lot of podcasts, a lot of webinars I listen to we're talking about like, the latest gadgets and latest techs. But I think that the basics are so important to provide that back to the workers, so we kind of like show them respect. I was glad to talk about that actually. Lastly, we talked about data, right? How do we make it more insights actionable? Like, this system now, we're building the system that allows you to prioritize and lower the risk by being more proactive and be more actionable actually like now. So we're doing predictive analytics right now that can say, okay, here the worker is at risk here, could potentially be at risk because he's worked for 16 hours for last, 5 days. He needs to take a rest, like, and very simple insights that we've not used. Now we're going to be able to use that data to make the workforce more safer and have more better culture on the SOP side actually. So I'm just gonna kind of end with that here. Thanks for joining us, Kip. It was a pleasure talking to you. It's I appreciate your contribution to the industry, and I appreciate the love of craft. Let's bring the craft workers back again. Let's make construction cool again. And yeah, we wait for any more questions, Amy. And if not, like, we will go from there.
I think we're all good on the questions right now. There was one earlier that you guys answered, so
Okay.
call it a
Thank
day.
you so much, Kip. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.